All right, so we are going to do the Estado Novo. Okay, so the Declaration of Estado Novo, New Year's Eve, beginning of 1938. This was in the wake of the announcement of the Cohen Plan, in the wake of the attack by the integralists on Vargas, where he was able to hold off at his house until the military showed up. Use this radio communique basically to say, this is who we are. And reform under Estado Novo, the Brazilian form of fascism. And so the debate is this an ideological fascism, or is this a creation of Vargas himself? And I think one of the things that we look at as we're doing this is, what exactly is the heart of this new government? Political opponents basically disappear during Estado Novo. One of the things that Vargas does do is create a secret or a police force that represses any opponents. And so basically political opponents, any of them that there are, spend time in prison. And so that's definitely something that I think goes against kind of his idea. So reform under Estado Novo, the Brazilian form of fascism. Number one is he continues to bring the state governments under the control of the federal government. He expanded government ministries. This was a big thing, and the ministries are all geared towards some type of industry. So the pine trees, salt, tea, alcohol, sugar, coffee, industry, workers are all given their own ministry. He also put the, and we'll see later, he creates the ministry for steel in 1938. He creates the ministry for oil. And so basically he's moving forward trying to create an economic planning of Brazil's industry and continuing to work on expanding its industry, expanding its agricultural products. Coffee, again, has to be central to anything he does. And one of the ways that he creates capital, basically leftover money that can be spent, is that he bans the coffee growing, continues to ban it, continues to burn coffee, with the idea that eventually they will be able to get coffee back, but also to take that and use it to raise capital for industry. Eliminate interstate taxes. We've talked about this before. He just wants to get rid of any possibility of taxing each other. He created the DASPs for standards for federal employees to praise skill rather than family lineage. This, however, wasn't totally successful. There was still a lot of patronage that goes on in which people get a job and get elected, and that people expect favors and jobs from them. It creates a lot of corruption, but in this case, he was trying to basically open up a place for the middle class and not just the rich, and to open up these jobs for the middle class, which would mean skill rather than family. But because of the lack of education, this doesn't necessarily have its intended focus. So how fascist was Vargas? Well, he banned the movement of Brazilian fascists that had a racist tint to it. He did expand trade with Germany, and so some people in the United States especially was worried that he would go with Germany, but part of Germany was white first. And if you look at Vargas, that doesn't fit with who he is. And he knows Brazil cannot fit into the German form of nationalism. But he seems to use Germany to play against the United States and Great Britain in order to maximize the best for Brazil. As he jailed the fascist movement in Brazil, you could tell that this may be more of a pragmatic move than really it was true nationalism. Industrial growth. Industrial growth takes off during Vargas's time. And so we see, and this was the idea, is there's a trade surplus, there's a lack of money coming, or lack of industrial products coming in, and so industry went from 21% of the GDP 1920 to 43% of the GDP by 1940. You could tell it doubled. Metallurgy and electrical equipment doubled. Textile outputs grow considerably. By 1933, Brazil's industry had recovered and begins to grow from there. When you look at ISI, or import substitution industrialization, government support has to be a part of it. And one of the things was, can they have the capital? Can they create the capital that will be able to then use to set up and support industry? So he had to create a supply of labor and capital. So he had to increase technical schools, in which he did, but he also organized labor. And this also served both of these purposes. So he organized labor under government unions. You couldn't join a private union. You could only join and had to join the government union. Now, obviously, the government union is not necessarily going to look out for the best of the workers, but continue to look out what's best for Vargas and Brazil. It became more about the importance of the state than necessarily the importance or looking out for what workers needed. However, what it does create is a large amount of money in these worker mandatory pension funds. So workers had to put money into the pension funds, and so this created money that Brazil and the Bank of Brazil could then invest in work. So such measures were adopted, such as the introduction of minimum rural wage in 1943. They also raised minimum wage, and then by 1944 there were over 500,000 union workers, and they were forced to pay into these pension funds. In using this pension schemes, he was then able to create money that could then be reinvested. He also had health and safety regulations and a maximum 48-hour work week. Direct and indirect public investment. He then could take this money, and the Bank of Brazil was instructed to do this. He also, through taxes and taking the tax money that the states were taxing each other, also using any of the money that the state was bringing in, he would then apply it to some bigger industries that needed government support. And then indirect public investment was really trying to encourage investment in certain different types of diversification, giving tax breaks for certain industries in order to get Brazil going. And then the appeal of economic nationalism, and this is something where he consistently appealed to the people through radio addresses, similar to what FDR did, of just saying that we are about Brazil, Brazil needs to rise up, and there really was this economic tint to what he was trying to do. So supply of capital and labor, coffee support programs were number one in supplying capital. By continuing to give price floors, meaning that the price could only drop to this for coffee growers, despite having a hard time paying for that, he was able to support the coffee growers enough that they were then able to take their money and redistribute it into the growing of cotton, and then in supplying capital for industry. The first labor ministry, minimum wage, and government-sponsored unions, pension institutes, and savings banks for workers benefited whose capital could be steered towards state-favored investment. Bank of Brazil could loan to government-designated borrowers, and import licensing and foreign exchange authorities. One of the things that he was trying to do was, as the ability of Brazil to import comes back, he really tries to restrict what people can bring into the country, and says that only certain people can import, only certain foreign exchange can happen, and that was to control what was coming in. There was a large growth in vocational schools throughout Brazil, but again, large growth means 12 to 20 schools that were mainly in São Paulo and the western provinces for the middle class. Although college goes up a lot, most of this is the elite, and does not necessarily open it up for all of it. Now, import substitution industrialization. Why ISI? Decreasing Latin American dependence on the world economy. ISI happens when imports just naturally drop. It also can be contrived by putting tariffs in place, by banning certain imports, by charging people lots of money to bring in those imports. Creates a situation where Brazil can kind of and most of Latin America could then control what's coming in. How? Artificially stimulating the growth of industry within the region via policy, high tariffs, and quotas to limit imports, by provided state subsidies, tax breaks, and targeted lending, all of which Vargas did in Brazil. What? Nurture the growth and development of domestic companies so Latin America would manufacture the industrial goods that had previously been imported from abroad. Who? Winners, Brazil and Mexico, and to a lesser extent Chile and Argentina. Losers, small countries that did not have the leadership or population to sustain it. So the problems of ISI, though, are these three things. First, you need to increase production without large markups. That most of the products in the industry is that they produce very little and then they charge a lot for it. And in order for industry really to compete internationally, they need to expand production and lower price. Second, create a market by agricultural reform so that the majority of the society can purchase the goods. And third, need to improve infrastructure. He also talks about the need for capital. So let's see how Vargas does on these three things. Does he provide capital so that they can increase production without large markups? Does he create heavy industry? Does he create a market through agricultural reform and the need to improve infrastructure? Vargas encouraged the continuation of imports. Tariffs were 39%. There were quotas on most major issues, but there were some exemptions for large machines and things that were needed to continue the growth of Brazilian industry. Capital was reinvested. By 1940, the capital investment in factories totaled $700 million, and this was really important to expand production. Government gave low-interest loans, like I said, targeted loans to certain people. By 1933, Brazil's industry had recovered. In 5 years since then, the industrial production went up 44%. Industrial output was up by 60%. 3 times more new industrial plants went into operation. And by 1941, there was 44,100 plants, employing 944,000 workers, compared to 1920, with 13,336 firms employing 300,000 workers. You can see that by 1941, there was a huge growth in industry, and yet we see that it's only 1 million workers. There was 14 to 15 million people in Brazil, so we know that the majority of people are still in agricultural work. Indirect public investment, economic nationalism, essential industries that were vital for national security. Estado Novo included a ban on selling minerals to foreigners. So it basically said that any industry that's important for national security, any industry that deals with minerals, is going to be all about Brazil. Infrastructure, transportation, air age. Vargas pushed road construction. Vargas protected natural resources in both constitutions of 1934 and 1937. Direct public investment into private enterprise. In 1940, the National Steel Commission was created in 1940, followed by the Volta Redondo steel plant, which was aided by a $20 million loan from the United States and also help from United Steel Corporation. In 1938, Vargas created the National Petroleum Council and continued the growth. In 1938, they also created an oil company, a national oil company controlled by the national government. Oil was extremely important. They called it the Natural Petroleum Company, and this helped Brazil find oil. Not a lot of oil was found right away, but right now, the creation of Petrobras in 1953, the state continued to own the oil, and now Brazil is a leading producer in Latin America of oil that they found offshore. But this was a huge kind of piece of economic nationalism, was encouraging people to do this. The Volta Redonda steel plant by 1955 was producing over 646,000 tons of steel annually. This was a huge kind of jump for Brazil's industry because, like we said before, heavy industry is extremely important. Oil, steel, being able to build engine parts, those types of things. The National Steel Commission created in 1940. U.S. aided Vargas when they were helping with the war effort, or that Vargas was helping with their war effort, so they gave that money to him. Brazil started producing car parts, truck engines, things that they just weren't doing before. Direct public investment in enterprise. 1938, Vargas created the National Petroleum Council. In 1938, Vargas created the National Petroleum Company. January 1940, 5 years plan. The goals were to build dams on the rivers for hydroelectric power and create a national steel company and locate and refine oil. The National Steel Commission created in 1940, $20 million loan, like I said before, and the Volta Restana steel plant. This is what I kind of went over before. So the distribution of industrial activity by percentage, you can see 1920 versus 1940. You see some growth in food products. You see actually a drop in textiles, and that's just not a drop in the actual amount, but just the percentage of the overall industry value. You can see that metals goes up a lot, machinery goes up, non-metallic minerals goes up, chemical and pharmaceutical plants go up by quite a bit, and this is one of probably the leading growth area. And this was part of the expansion of college allowed Brazil to be able to grow in this area. So some of the easier, lighter industries go away, and you start seeing heavier industries replace it. Planting and publishing was a big part of it. And you could just see that food products going up a little bit, but textiles going down, apparel and footwear going down, but yet pharmaceutical products, minerals, metals going up, machinery going up, shows a growth in heavy industry. Industries reliant on imported heavy machinery. So let's go over the limits of Vargas's role as the leader of Estado Novo. Industries were reliant on important heavy machinery. Most of the development took place in the richer states. 1938, Sao Paulo made 43% of the industrial goods. By 1943, 54%. Agriculture was still slash and burn. One large farm in 100 had a tractor. 1 in 4 had an actual plow. Large estates still dominated, where lots of people were being used and not very paid very much. Most Brazilians, peasant workers, made $11.80 a month. That's U.S. dollars. That just shows how little people were making. Some of the social problems that continued was that women workers only made 60% of what men workers made. Although 29% of the society was middle class, which is a huge growth in 1940, which is a huge growth compared to 1920. There still is a long way to go. The condition in cities, and although things were better as far as the improvement in industry and the improvement in the diversification of agriculture and just the improvement overall, you can still see that there were some problems within industry. Also, we talked about one of Anderson's things for ISI was to see how did they do with agricultural reform. Well, we can see that the wages were still pretty low. And then we look at this land ownership chart here. We see that under 1%, the farms that were large farms, you see 1 point, 100,000 hectare, or like small farms actually goes down. But then you can see the smaller farms that are 1 hectare to 4.9 drop. And we just see basically percentage of operation with farms of stated size, percentage of land in the farms or estate. Okay, so basically you can see a growth in a lot of the lower farms here, a growth in the size, and smaller farms did increase growth and had land, but as you can see, most of the land is still within the population of very small amount of people. And so basically the people that had the largest farms were the smallest amounts of people that controlled them, and that just showed that land reform didn't really happen. And because of that, that leads to one that possibly ISI did not work as well as it could have, because most of those workers needed to be able to buy industrial goods, and we talked about this with the United States. If they were able to buy industrial goods, then that would create an even stronger internal market. One of the things that I didn't quite get to, and I want to talk to you a little bit about, is the growth of infrastructure. Infrastructure grew a lot during this time. Vargas put a lot of energy into it. However, most of the growth in infrastructure was in Sao Paulo and the states on the eastern side. Most of the new railway lines were built there. Now, one of the things that he did put quite a bit of energy and money into was the growth of planes and airports. The U.S. built airports for Brazil, and Brazil also put a lot of money into it. Estado Novo, state governments under control of the states, negotiated. Before, used to negotiate their own loans. They can't anymore without national government approval. He works hard, basically creating state-owned railroads and other infrastructure, having private and public corporations centered in Rio that were building infrastructure. They added a lot of new railway lines, added a lot of new the transportation age, created an air ministry in 1941. Brazil accounted for 3/4 of all the air traffic in Brazil, which shows that that was kind of a big area of growth, given how hard it is to navigate through Brazil with just the Amazon rainforest and just the jungle there. It was much easier to go ahead and fly over it. But however, by 1939, there was 21,241 miles of railroads, 65% which were found in 4 states, like I said. And the government of the states managed over 2/3 of the railroads. So the question is, how, here's a quote here to read. Skidmore analysis in sum, Brazil industrialization between 1930 and 1945 was the product of 2 factors: spontaneous import substitution, resulting from the collapse of the ability to import, and the maintenance of a domestic demand by coffee support programs and the shift to private investment from the export sector to industrial production for the domestic market. Direct and indirect state intervention. Basically what we've been talking about, and it was somewhat successful. So, some questions about Vargas, and then we will use these to kind of spear our research and debate as we move forward. Was Vargas a radical leader? Should Vargas be considered a national hero? Was Estado Novo good for Brazil?